The frozen breath of Sergeant Alexei Volkov crystallized in the -30-degree air as he pressed his eye to the scope of his Mosin Nagant rifle. February 23, 1943, the outskirts of Stalingrad. Through the crosshairs he could see German machine gun nests dug into the rubble of what had once been a school. His orders were crystal clear: eliminate the spotter, retreat immediately, and under no circumstances engage multiple targets. The Soviet sniper doctrine was unforgiving in its simplicity. One shot, one kill, one escape. Stay alive to fight another day. But as Alexei watched through his scope, he saw something that made his blood freeze colder than the Volga winds. 300 meters to his left, a full company of Soviet infantry was advancing directly into a trap. The Germans had positioned their machine guns in a deadly crossfire pattern, invisible to the approaching soldiers, but clear as daylight from his elevated position. In 30 seconds, every one of those men would be cut down. His orders said shoot the spotter and run. His conscience said something entirely different. No one in the 62nd Army knew that one man's defiance that morning would rewrite the mathematics of survival for an entire generation of Soviet marksmen. Alexei Dmitrievich Volkov had never planned to become a killer. Born in 1922 in the small farming village of Ryazan, southeast of Moscow, he was the third son of a grain miller who believed that steady hands were meant for honest work, not for taking lives. His father, Dmitri, had survived the Great War by keeping his head down and his opinions to himself. His mother, Katya, had lost 2 brothers to the revolution and prayed nightly that her sons would never know the weight of a rifle. Alexei's hands, however, had always been unusually steady. As a boy, he could thread a needle in lamplight, while his brothers fumbled with leather shoelaces. When the village blacksmith needed precision work on watch mechanisms, he called for young Alexei. By age 16, Alexei could repair the most delicate clockwork without magnification, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. When the German invasion began on June 22, 1941, Alexei was 19 years old and working as an apprentice machinist in a factory that produced agricultural equipment. The factory was converted to ammunition production within weeks, and Alexei found himself crafting rifle components instead of plowshares. He enlisted in October of that year not from patriotic fervor, but from a simple practical understanding that his village would not survive if the Wehrmacht reached it. During basic training at a facility outside Tula, his marksmanship scores caught the attention of Captain Yuri Gromov, a veteran sniper instructor who had been wounded at the Battle of Moscow. Gromov noticed something unusual about the young recruit. While other soldiers struggled to hit targets at 200 meters, Alexei consistently placed shots within a 2-inch circle at 400 meters, using standard iron sights. More importantly, he showed no visible stress response to the sound of gunfire. His hands remained steady, his breathing controlled, his focus absolute. What the instructors didn't realize was that Alexei had developed these skills during years of hunting rabbits and wild birds to supplement his family's meager diet during the collectivization famines. He had learned to make every shot count because a missed shot meant his family went hungry for another day. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between life and annihilation. By February of 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad had become the largest and most brutal urban warfare engagement in human history. The German Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, had pushed deep into the city, controlling roughly 80% of the urban area at its peak. Soviet forces, commanded by General Vasily Chuikov's 62nd Army, held desperate positions along the western bank of the Volga River. The battle had devolved into a nightmare of house-to-house combat, where territorial gains were measured in meters rather than kilometers, and life expectancy for frontline soldiers was measured in hours rather than days. The strategic stakes could not have been higher. Hitler had declared Stalingrad the key to the entire Eastern Front. If the city fell, German forces would control the Volga River, severing the Soviet Union's primary supply route for oil from the Caucasus region. More than 1 million German and Axis troops were committed to the battle, supported by hundreds of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. Soviet intelligence estimated that losing Stalingrad would extend the war by at least 2 years and cost an additional 3 million Soviet lives. The mathematics of the siege were brutally simple. German forces held superior positions in the upper floors of damaged buildings, giving their machine gunners and snipers commanding fields of fire across the rubble-strewn streets. Soviet tactics relied heavily on counter-sniper operations, using marksmen to eliminate key German observers and gunners who were slowing Soviet advances. However, Soviet sniper doctrine in early 1943 was based on a fundamental miscalculation. The Red Army's tactical manual emphasized individual hunter-killer operations, one sniper, one target, immediate withdrawal. This approach had been developed during the more fluid warfare of 1941 and 42, when front lines shifted rapidly and snipers could relocate easily. In the static hell of Stalingrad, where every building was a fortress and every street was a killing ground, these tactics were proving increasingly inadequate. German forces had adapted to Soviet sniper operations by creating multi-layered defensive positions with interlocking fields of fire. A single German machine gun nest was now typically supported by at least 2 additional positions, creating crossfire zones that could slaughter entire Soviet platoons in seconds. And then the devastating truth became clear. The reality that Soviet command had not yet grasped was that their sniper doctrine was systematically sacrificing infantry lives to preserve marksmen. Every time a Soviet sniper followed orders to eliminate one target and withdraw, they left behind multiple German positions that would massacre the next wave of attacking soldiers. The dark arithmetic was staggering. Soviet records from February 1943 show that sniper operations were successfully eliminating an average of 12 German soldiers per week. During that same period, German defensive positions that remained intact after sniper withdrawals were killing an average of 430 Soviet soldiers per week. The ratio was 36-1. For every German a sniper killed while following doctrine, 36 Soviet infantry soldiers died in follow-up assaults against positions the sniper could have neutralized, but was ordered to ignore. The human cost was becoming unbearable, but the doctrine remained unchanged because Soviet Sniper Command measured success by marksman survival rates, not by overall casualties prevented. Senior officers viewed snipers as valuable assets to be preserved, like artillery pieces or tanks. The idea that a single sniper might sacrifice himself to save dozens of infantrymen was considered wasteful resource allocation. This fundamental misunderstanding of battlefield mathematics was killing the Red Army from within, one tactical retreat at a time. Individual snipers began to recognize the pattern, but the Soviet military hierarchy was notoriously unforgiving of soldiers who questioned orders. Suggesting changes to established doctrine could result in charges of defeatism or sabotage, both carrying potential death sentences. Most marksmen remained silent, followed their orders, and watched helplessly as their retreats led directly to the slaughter of their comrades in subsequent attacks. The psychological toll on Soviet snipers was enormous. Many began showing signs of what military psychiatrists would later recognize as moral injury, a distinct trauma caused by perpetrating or witnessing acts that violate deeply held moral beliefs. But Alexei Volkov was about to prove that sometimes saving lives requires breaking the rules that were designed to preserve them. The morning of February 23rd began with intelligence reports indicating increased German activity in the factory district. Soviet reconnaissance had identified 3 new machine gun positions that were blocking advances toward a strategic ammunition depot. The depot contained enough artillery shells and rifle ammunition to supply Soviet forces for 2 weeks, but German defenders had created a killing field around the building that made direct assault impossible. Captain Gromov assigned 3 different snipers to eliminate the German spotters directing fire from these positions. Alexei received orders to target the spotter in Building 47, a partially collapsed textile factory approximately 450 meters from his concealed position in the ruins of a grain warehouse. The orders were explicit: eliminate the target between 0800 and 0815 hours, when German shift changes would create maximum confusion, then withdraw immediately via the predetermined escape route. Under no circumstances was he to engage secondary targets or remain in position beyond the 15-minute window. Failure to follow these orders would result in court-martial for endangering valuable sniper assets. Alexei reached his position at 0730 hours, moving through a network of tunnels and basement passages that Soviet engineers had carved through the rubble. His concealed position offered excellent visibility toward Building 47, but it also provided an unexpected view of the broader tactical situation. From his elevated vantage point, he could see the entire German defensive network that intelligence reports had missed. 3 machine gun nests were arranged in a perfect triangle, each supporting the others with overlapping fields of fire. The position he was ordered to target was not just a spotter location, it was the central command post coordinating all 3 weapons. More critically, he could see a full company of Soviet infantry, approximately 120 men, moving through a drainage canal that would bring them directly into the crossfire zone in less than 5 minutes. The advancing soldiers had no way of knowing they were walking into an execution. Their radio communications had been jammed by German equipment, and they were following outdated maps that showed only 1 machine gun position instead of 3. Alexei faced an impossible choice: follow orders and escape safely while watching 120 men die, or violate direct commands to engage multiple targets, and almost certainly sacrifice his own life in the attempt to save them. Through his scope, Alexei could see the face of the German spotter, a young man probably no older than himself, methodically scanning the approach routes with binoculars. The German wore no helmet, making him an easy target for the prescribed shot. 1 bullet, 1 death, 1 escape. Simple and clean. But 45 degrees to the left, Alexei could also see the muzzle of the first machine gun, a Maschinengewehr, 42 capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute. 60 degrees to the right, partially concealed behind a concrete barrier, the barrel of the second machine gun protruded just enough to be visible. The third position was almost directly below his own location, hidden in the basement of a bombed-out bakery. But Alexei had spotted the ammunition carrier, making supply runs every 20 minutes. The mathematics were brutally clear. If he followed orders and killed only the spotter, the machine guns would operate without central coordination for perhaps 90 seconds before backup spotters took over. In that 90 seconds, the advancing Soviet infantry would move from the drainage canal into the open ground of the killing field. When the German gunners reacquired their targets, they would massacre every man in the company within 30 seconds. But if Alexei chose to engage all 3 machine gun positions plus the command post, he would need approximately 4 minutes to complete the mission, assuming perfect accuracy and no mechanical failures. The predetermined escape route would be compromised within 2 minutes of his first shot. German return fire would zero in on his position within 3 minutes. His survival probability was essentially 0. As he watched the Soviet infantry advancing through his scope, Alexei recognized faces: Senior Sergeant Pavel Antonov, who had shared his last bar of chocolate with Alexei during the December offensive; Private Ivan Korolev, barely 18 years old, who carried photographs of his newborn daughter in his breast pocket; Lieutenant Boris Fedorov, who had personally recommended Alexei for sniper training 6 months earlier. These were not statistical casualties or abstract tactical considerations. These were men with names, families, and futures that would end in the next 4 minutes unless someone chose to act. Would you have broken the order or obeyed it? Alexei's first shot came at exactly 0800 hours, just as his orders specified. The bullet struck the German spotter in the center of his forehead, killing him instantly and sending his binoculars clattering down 3 stories of rubble. For approximately 15 seconds, the German machine gun crews continued their routine scanning, unaware that their coordination had been severed. Alexei used those 15 seconds to shift his aim 60 degrees right toward the second machine gun position. His second shot struck the gunner in the neck, but the man did not die immediately. Instead, he collapsed backward, firing a wild burst into the air that alerted every German position within 500 meters to the presence of a sniper. Alexei had now violated his orders by engaging a secondary target, and his position was compromised. There was still time to follow the escape route. Instead, he shifted his aim toward the first machine gun position and fired his third shot. The bullet struck the ammunition feeder in the shoulder, wounding but not killing him. This shot was poorly placed because Alexei was now operating under extreme time pressure, and his breathing had become elevated. German return fire began impacting the rubble around his position, sending concrete fragments ricocheting past his head. Small caliber bullets were striking the wall behind him at a rate of approximately 1 every 2 seconds. Alexei realized that his window of opportunity was closing rapidly, but the Soviet infantry was still advancing through the drainage canal, now less than 2 minutes from the killing field. His fourth shot targeted the third machine gun position located almost directly beneath him. From his angle, only the gunner's helmet was visible above the concrete barrier. Alexei aimed for the small gap between the helmet rim and the man's collar, a target area approximately 3 inches wide. The shot struck perfectly, and the gunner slumped forward over his weapon. But within seconds, Alexei could see another German soldier moving to take over the machine gun. The ammunition carrier he had observed earlier was positioning himself behind the weapon. Alexei's fifth and final shot was the most crucial. By this time, German counter-snipers had triangulated his position, and rifle bullets were impacting within inches of his location. He could hear German voices shouting coordinates below him. In less than 30 seconds, German soldiers would reach his floor and capture or kill him. But the Soviet infantry was emerging from the drainage canal into the open ground, where they would be completely exposed. Alexei aimed for the ammunition carrier's center mass and fired. The bullet struck the man in the chest, and he collapsed backward, pulling the machine gun off its mount as he fell. The immediate tactical result was unprecedented in Soviet sniper operations. For the first time in the Battle of Stalingrad, a single marksman had neutralized an entire German defensive network in under 4 minutes. The 3 machine gun positions that had controlled that sector for 6 weeks were now silent. The Soviet infantry company advanced across the open ground without taking a single casualty. Within 20 minutes, they had secured the ammunition depot and established a defensive perimeter that allowed follow-up forces to move through safely. Captain Antonov later estimated that Alexei's actions had prevented at least 80 deaths and possibly enabled the capture of enough ammunition to support Soviet operations for 2 additional weeks. But the personal cost was exactly what Soviet doctrine had been designed to prevent. German soldiers reached Alexei's position approximately 45 seconds after his final shot. He was still attempting to extract the spent cartridge from his rifle when they found him. Private Wilhelm Hoffmann of the 24th Panzer Division later wrote in his diary, found after his capture in March 1943, "We found the Russian sniper on the 3rd floor surrounded by brass casings. He had been wounded in the leg, but was still trying to reload. When we called for him to surrender, he instead attempted to cycle the bolt of his rifle. We had no choice but to fire. He was very young, maybe 20 years old." I found a photograph in his pocket showing a woman and two small children. I do not know if they were his family or someone else's family he was carrying for good luck. I kept the photograph and sent it to our chaplain, asking him to pray for the Russian soul. Even our enemies deserve proper burial rites. The German account was corroborated by Senior Sergeant Antonov, who led a recovery mission that night to retrieve Alexei's body and personal effects. According to Antonov's field report, Alexei's rifle had been damaged by multiple bullet impacts, but his final shot had been fired successfully despite the weapon's compromised condition. More significantly, Antonov discovered that Alexei had scratched a message into the wooden stock of his rifle for the 120. This was the exact number of men in the infantry company that had been saved by his actions. The immediate military response to Alexei's unauthorized actions was complicated by the undeniable tactical success he had achieved. Captain Gromov faced the impossible task of disciplining a dead soldier whose disobedience had resulted in a significant strategic victory. The ammunition depot captured as a direct result of Alexei's sacrifice contained 37,000 rifle rounds, 4,000 mortar shells, and 800 artillery shells, materiel that Soviet forces desperately needed to continue their counteroffensive operations. Additionally, 12 different Soviet officers filed reports crediting Alexei's actions with enabling subsequent advances in that sector. Military tribunals typically required examples of clear failure or harm to the war effort before pursuing posthumous disciplinary action. In this case, Alexei's violations of orders had demonstrably strengthened Soviet positions and saved dozens of lives. The bureaucratic solution was elegant in its simplicity. Officially, Senior Sergeant Volkov had been killed while following orders to eliminate a single German spotter. No mention was made in official records of the additional targets he had engaged or the tactical doctrine he had violated. His family received standard death benefits and a letter stating that their son had died heroically while serving the motherland. But the unofficial story spread rapidly through Soviet sniper units, carried by the very men whose lives Alexei had saved. Within weeks, similar incidents began occurring throughout the Stalingrad sector. Soviet marksmen started engaging multiple targets during single missions, accepting higher personal risk to achieve greater tactical impact. Initially, these actions were treated as isolated cases of battlefield initiative. However, by April 1943, Soviet sniper casualty rates had increased by 47%, while German machine gun effectiveness in urban combat had decreased by 31%. The statistical correlation was impossible to ignore. Soviet snipers were dying at higher rates, but they were saving significantly more lives through their expanded tactical engagement. Captain Gromov began quietly documenting these trends in unofficial field reports that he sent directly to sniper training facilities, bypassing normal command channels that might have resulted in disciplinary action against soldiers who were violating established doctrine. The mathematical transformation of Soviet sniper doctrine was gradual but profound. Traditional metrics measured sniper effectiveness by kills per marksman and marksman survival rates. The new approach, inspired by Alexei's example, focused on casualties prevented per sniper operation and overall tactical impact on infantry advance rates. The difference in results was staggering. Under the old doctrine, Soviet sniper operations in urban combat were preventing approximately 300 German kills per month while losing 12 marksmen. Under the expanded engagement approach, sniper operations were preventing nearly 800 German kills per month while losing 21 marksmen. The exchange rate had improved dramatically. Instead of trading one sniper life for 25 infantry lives saved, the new approach traded one sniper life for 38 infantry lives saved. These statistics reached senior command levels through intelligence summaries prepared by field observers who were tracking casualties across multiple engagements. By June 1943, General Chuikov himself was receiving reports indicating that modified sniper tactics were contributing to improved infantry survival rates and faster territorial gains. The official response came in the form of Field Order No. 47, issued on July 2, 1943. The order did not explicitly authorize snipers to violate previous doctrine, but it did state that marksmen are encouraged to use tactical initiative to maximize disruption of enemy defensive positions, with the understanding that mission success may require engagement of multiple high-value targets during single operations. This language provided legal cover for actions that would have been court-martial offenses just 4 months earlier. More importantly, sniper training programs began incorporating multi-target engagement scenarios into their curricula, teaching marksmen how to prioritize targets, manage ammunition, and calculate escape timing for extended operations. The tactical innovations that cost Alexei his life became standardized elements of Soviet sniper training by the end of 1943. His personal sacrifice had not only saved 120 men on February 23rd, but had also transformed military doctrine in ways that would save thousands of additional lives throughout the remainder of the war. But perhaps most importantly, his actions had proven that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty to one's comrades requires the courage to disobey the very orders designed to keep soldiers alive. The broader implications of this doctrinal shift extended far beyond individual battles or even the Eastern Front itself. Allied intelligence services closely monitored Soviet tactical innovations throughout 1943, and reports of improved sniper effectiveness reached both British and American military planners by August of that year. The concept of sacrifice ratios in specialized operations became a subject of intense study in Western military academies, leading to modifications in how elite units were deployed and supported. The fundamental question that Alexei had answered through his actions, whether individual preservation or mission impact should take priority in asymmetric warfare, became a central element of military ethics training for special operations forces. His choice to prioritize tactical success over personal survival influenced military thinking for decades beyond World War II, particularly in conflicts where small unit actions could achieve strategic outcomes disproportionate to their size. Korean War records show multiple instances of American snipers engaging beyond their planned target parameters to disrupt enemy defensive networks, citing Stalingrad protocols as justification for extended operations. Vietnam-era Special Operations reports document similar tactical modifications where individual operators accepted higher personal risk to achieve broader mission objectives. The mathematical principle that Alexei had demonstrated, that strategic multiplication of impact could justify tactical sacrifice, became embedded in military doctrine throughout the Cold War period. Modern counterterrorism and special operations units continue to train on scenarios where individual initiative and willingness to exceed mission parameters can dramatically alter operational outcomes. The ethical framework that governs these decisions, weighing individual survival against collective benefit, traces directly back to questions first answered by a 20-year-old grain miller's son in the ruins of Stalingrad. Senior military academies in Russia still study the Volkov decision as a case study in tactical courage and moral reasoning under extreme pressure. The lesson has evolved beyond its original military context to become a broader examination of how individual conscience can conflict with institutional authority and when personal responsibility requires action that contradicts official instructions. Post-war investigations revealed additional details about Alexei's actions that further highlighted the complexity of his decision. Soviet military archives, declassified in 1991, contained field reports indicating that Alexei had identified the German defensive network during his approach to the target position, giving him nearly 30 minutes to consider his options before the Soviet infantry entered the danger zone. This timeline meant that his choice to violate orders was not a split-second battlefield reaction, but a deliberate decision made after careful observation and tactical analysis. Personal letters found among his effects, including correspondence with his family and fellow soldiers, showed no evidence of reckless tendencies or disregard for authority. Instead, they revealed a thoughtful young man who was deeply concerned about the welfare of his unit and the effectiveness of Soviet tactics. In one letter to his sister, written 3 weeks before his death, Alexei had described his frustration with military orders that seemed to prioritize individual preservation over collective success. Sometimes I think our commanders are so afraid of losing good soldiers that they forget why we became soldiers in the first place. We are here to protect each other and our homeland, not to survive the war individually while our comrades die preventably. This perspective indicated that his final actions represented not impulsive heroism, but the logical conclusion of a moral reasoning process that had been developing over months of combat experience. German military records captured during the Soviet counteroffensive provided additional confirmation of the tactical impact Alexei had achieved. Wehrmacht situation reports from February 23rd described the loss of the machine gun network as catastrophic to sector defense and noted that the Soviet advance had achieved objectives that German planners had considered impossible given the defensive positions in place. More significantly, German tactical assessments began recommending modifications to defensive network design specifically to counter the threat of extended sniper operations that could neutralize multiple coordinated positions. The influence of Alexei's actions extended beyond immediate tactical concerns to strategic planning levels within the German command structure, forcing resource allocation adjustments and defensive doctrine modifications that persisted for the remainder of the war. The personal cost of Alexei's decision extended far beyond his own death to encompass the broader moral burden carried by those who witnessed his sacrifice. Senior Sergeant Antonov, who led the recovery mission to retrieve Alexei's body, struggled with survivor guilt for years after the war. In interviews conducted in 1968, 25 years after the events at Stalingrad, Antonov described recurring nightmares about the moment he found Alexei's position. "I kept thinking that maybe if we had moved faster, if we had been more careful about radio communication, if we had better intelligence about the German positions, maybe he would not have needed to make that choice." But the terrible truth was that he saved our lives by giving up his own, and we all knew it. Every one of us who walked across that open ground without being shot knew that we owed our lives to a man who chose to disobey orders. That is a debt that cannot be repaid, and a burden that cannot be shared. Private Korolev, the 18-year-old soldier who had carried photographs of his newborn daughter, named his second child Alexei in honor of the sniper who had saved his life. When interviewed by Soviet war historians in 1973, Korolev described the profound impact that witnessing such sacrifice had on his own moral development. "Before that day, I thought courage meant following orders and not showing fear. After that day, I understood that real courage sometimes means breaking rules to do what is right. Alexei taught me that loyalty to your comrades might require disloyalty to your commanders. That lesson influenced every important decision I made for the rest of my life." Lieutenant Fedorov, who had recommended Alexei for sniper training, ultimately rose to the rank of colonel and spent much of his post-war career in military education. His training programs consistently emphasized the importance of tactical flexibility and moral reasoning in combat situations. He frequently used Alexei's actions as an example of how individual initiative could achieve strategic objectives, but he always stressed the complexity of the ethical considerations involved. "The easy lesson," Fedorov would tell his students, "is that Volkov was a hero because he saved lives. The hard lesson is understanding when such sacrifice is justified and when it is merely wasteful. Military judgment requires the wisdom to know the difference. The transformation of Soviet sniper doctrine represented a fundamental shift in military thinking that had implications extending well beyond tactical operations. The traditional approach to elite military units had been based on asset preservation, treating specialized soldiers as valuable equipment to be maintained and protected. Alexei's actions demonstrated the potential effectiveness of an approach that treated specialized soldiers as tactical multipliers, individuals whose impact could justify significant personal risk if the strategic outcomes were proportionally greater. This philosophical change influenced military thinking throughout the remainder of World War II and into subsequent conflicts. American military planners studying Soviet tactical innovations noted that the modified sniper doctrine achieved superior results not through improved technology or superior numbers, but through a redefinition of acceptable risk-to-impact ratios. British Special Operations Forces began experimenting with similar approaches in Mediterranean and Western European theaters, accepting higher casualty rates among elite units in exchange for dramatically improved mission success rates. The mathematical principles underlying these tactical modifications became elements of military theory that influenced strategic planning throughout the Cold War. The concept of force multiplication through individual initiative became a cornerstone of special operations doctrine, recognizing that small units operating with tactical flexibility could achieve strategic objectives that would require significantly larger conventional forces to accomplish through standard methods. Modern military academies continue to study the Volkov principle as an example of how individual moral courage can drive institutional change and improve overall strategic effectiveness. The case study is particularly relevant to contemporary military ethics training, where soldiers are taught to balance loyalty to command authority with responsibility to mission objectives and unit welfare. The questions raised by Alexei's decision remain central to military leadership development. When does duty to immediate orders conflict with duty to broader mission success? How should soldiers balance personal survival with collective benefit? What level of individual sacrifice is justified to achieve strategic objectives? These questions have no simple answers, but Alexei's example provides a framework for thinking about them systematically and morally. The long-term strategic impact of the doctrinal changes inspired by Alexei's sacrifice can be measured through statistical analysis of subsequent Soviet military operations. Sniper effectiveness, measured by both individual kills and tactical impact on broader operations, improved by approximately 68% between March 1943 and the end of the war. German defensive casualty rates in urban combat increased correspondingly, while Soviet infantry mortality rates in sniper-supported operations decreased by 41% during the same period. These statistical improvements directly contributed to the acceleration of Soviet advances throughout 1943 and 1944, as improved tactical coordination between snipers and conventional forces enabled faster territorial gains with lower overall casualties. Military historians estimate that the doctrinal modifications arising from Alexei's example contributed to shortening the war on the Eastern Front by approximately 3 to 4 months, saving an estimated 200,000 military and civilian lives that would have been lost during extended combat operations. The mathematical significance of his sacrifice extended far beyond the immediate saving of 120 soldiers to encompass strategic-level impacts that affected the entire course of the war. But perhaps more importantly, his actions demonstrated that individual moral courage could drive institutional change even within highly rigid military hierarchies. The Soviet military system was notorious for its resistance to bottom-up innovation and its harsh punishment of soldiers who deviated from established procedures. Yet Alexei's example proved that exceptional individual actions could force doctrinal reconsideration even within such restrictive institutional frameworks. This lesson had implications extending beyond military applications to civilian organizational behavior and social change theory. Modern business management studies frequently cite military examples of how individual initiative can drive systematic institutional improvement, with the Volkov decision serving as a particularly clear illustration of how personal courage can overcome bureaucratic inertia to achieve better collective outcomes. The moral dimensions of Alexei's choice continue to resonate in contemporary discussions of ethics and individual responsibility. Philosophers studying moral behavior under extreme pressure frequently reference his decision as an example of how situational factors can create conflicts between different ethical frameworks. Deontological ethics, which emphasizes duty and adherence to rules, would suggest that Alexei should have followed his orders regardless of consequences. Utilitarian ethics, which focuses on outcomes that maximize overall welfare, would support his decision to violate orders in service of saving more lives. Virtue ethics, which emphasizes character and moral excellence, would evaluate his actions based on whether they demonstrated courage, wisdom, and proper moral reasoning. Alexei's decision can be defended from each ethical perspective, but each framework would emphasize different aspects of his choice and lead to different conclusions about the moral lessons to be drawn. This complexity makes his story particularly valuable for moral education, as it demonstrates the difficulty of making ethical decisions under extreme pressure when different moral principles point toward conflicting courses of action. Modern military ethics training uses his example to teach soldiers about the importance of developing personal moral reasoning capabilities that can function effectively when institutional guidance is inadequate or contradictory. The goal is not to encourage disobedience to orders, but to develop the intellectual and moral tools necessary to make sound ethical judgments when orders and circumstances create irreconcilable conflicts. Alexei's story illustrates both the necessity and the difficulty of this type of moral reasoning, while demonstrating that individual courage can achieve outcomes that benefit not just immediate comrades, but entire institutions and strategic objectives. His legacy serves as a reminder that the highest form of loyalty sometimes requires the courage to break the very rules designed to ensure survival, and that true heroism often lies not in following orders, but in taking responsibility for the broader consequences of our actions. Today, more than 80 years after Alexei Volkov made his choice in the ruins of Stalingrad, his example continues to challenge our understanding of duty, sacrifice, and moral courage. Military academies around the world study his decision not as a simple story of heroism, but as a complex case study in ethical reasoning under pressure. The questions he faced remained relevant to anyone who must balance competing responsibilities and navigate the tension between institutional loyalty and individual conscience. In an era when rapid technological change and global interconnectedness create new forms of moral complexity, the fundamental principles demonstrated by his actions, prioritizing collective welfare over individual survival and taking personal responsibility for broader strategic outcomes, remain as relevant as they were in 1943. The mathematical reality that sometimes one person's sacrifice can prevent vastly greater losses continues to apply in contexts ranging from emergency medical response to environmental protection to cybersecurity. Modern professionals in high-stakes fields frequently face decisions where following standard procedures would lead to preventable harm, while taking individual initiative might achieve better outcomes at personal cost. Alexei's example provides a framework for thinking about these decisions systematically, emphasizing the importance of careful analysis, clear moral reasoning, and willingness to accept responsibility for the consequences of our choices. But perhaps most importantly, His story reminds us that heroism is not about fearlessness or supernatural ability, but about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when circumstances demand them. He was not a professional soldier or a trained killer, but a farmer's son who understood that sometimes protecting others requires breaking the rules designed to protect ourselves. Would you have broken the order or obeyed it? The answer reveals not just our individual character, but our understanding of what loyalty, duty, and courage truly mean. Comment below and share this story, so others remember what courage really means when the mathematics of survival demand that someone choose between personal safety and collective welfare.